we are diving into the life, legacy, and inner world of one of India's most beloved cultural figures, Soumitra Chatterjee.
Shomitra Chatterjee lived many lives. He was not just an actor. He was a poet, he was an essayist, he was a playwright, he was a thinker, he was a political activist. I think he was that first impression he made, and that cocoon of love and romance between him and Shormila, it was just unforgettable. I think it has remained, like, there are certain lines from your favorite poetry or your favorite books, or there are certain imagery of art that will never be wiped away. I think Opu Shankar has been that in the Bengali imagination.
Hi, in today's episode, we are diving into the life, legacy, and inner world of one of India's most beloved cultural figures, and especially being a Bengali from Bengal, Soumitra Chatterjee. And to guide us on this journey is none other than Sanghamitra Chakraborty, the author of the recently published, widely acclaimed biography, Soumitra Chatterjee and His World. Sanghamitra, a seasoned journalist and editor whose career spans 3 decades across India's top publications. In a career spanning 30 years, she has been the editor of India Today, Group magazines, Reader's Digest, Prevention and Women's Health, and worked at several other leading publications at the start of her career, including The Times of India, Outlook, The Statesman, and Sunday. Writing on cinema, gender, health, and environment apart from news reporting. With this book, she gives us a masterclass in biographical writing and a deep, nuanced portrayal of a complex man. And for all our listeners, this isn't just a book, it's a layered tribute to a man who was far more than a movie star. He was a poet, a playwright, an intellectual, an artist, a political voice, and above all, a thinking actor who refused to play the fame game. And I'm honored to have you today with me, Sanghamitra, and your book, Soumitra Chatterjee and His World. What compelled you to take on the monumental task of writing the first definitive biography of Soumitra Chatterjee, and why now?
Before I answer your question, let me take a minute to acknowledge the fact that I'm really impressed with the work that you do, and a big thank you for having me on the show. Um, well, Shomitra Chatterjee's biography was waiting to be written. I realized that nobody had done a full biography so far. There had been a few efforts here and there to do his cinematic journey. There have been a couple of publications, but I wanted to take on the task of, uh, you know, putting together uh, his entire life. And his life includes so many different things. He's a multi-directional talent. Uh, but I also felt that, I've lived outside of Bengal and Calcutta for over 30 years. And I felt that although we admire him so much in Bengal, he's a complete icon. He's not uh, that widely known amongst Indians. And I felt that was a gap that needed to be plugged. My effort has been to take him to a pan India audience, and of course to this current generation, because the current generation, I find them to be so engaged, so bright, so full of conscience, that I felt that we also do not have too many people who can become icons, who can give us the direction and the inspiration. And I felt Shomitra Chatterjee was the perfect uh, person to look at. And as you said, especially someone who has been a Kolkata person and a Bengali, I felt a kind of responsibility towards this.
Wonderful, Sanghamitra. You structure it into 10 immersive sections, each with a distinct rhythm. So, what guided this whole narrative design, and why not follow a traditional linear, biography? What was the reason behind this?
Like I said, Shomitra Chatterjee lived many lives. He was not just an actor. He was a poet, he was an essayist. He edited the finest literary magazine Bengal has had. I mean, if one can say the finest, but definitely amongst the finest literary magazines. He was a playwright, he was a thinker, he was a political activist and a social activist. And later in his life, he took to art. So, how many lives uh, do we find within that one person? So I felt that it would be more logical to look at, the different lives he led, and that sort of, in a way, was also his contributions in each of those spheres. And I felt that instead of, although I started it chronologically with his birth and ended it with his passing, but I felt that, the sections that I have were based on, and to some extent, I kind of sort of gave weightage to what was more important for him and his contributions. Uh, that is how I decided to sort of chapterize them.
Amazing. In Pulu's Pachali, we meet the mischievous, curious child that Shomitra was. So that's a part I think very few people know, and you would be the best person. And then you introduce the philosophical and the aesthetic shadow of Tagore. So was Tagore more of a guiding presence or a haunting absence in his life?
I think the first, definitely. Uh, Although I'm pretty sure Soumitra Chatterjee, being the kind of person he was and the kind of, the emotional core that he had and that he brought into his thinking and his performance and every other thing that he touched, I'm sure he would have liked to have met Rabindranath Tagore. I mean, Rabindranath was alive when uh, uh, Pulu or Shomitra Chatterjee was a little boy, a child, but he was about 6 when Rabindranath passed away in 1941. So it wouldn't have been possible for him to have very, very strong memories, even if he had met him. I'm sure he would have asked Satyajit Ray, his Manikta, many questions about Rabindranath when he finally got to know him well, because Satyajit Ray actually went to the Kala Bhavan of Shantiniketan and had seen Rabindranath in person and experienced him. And
Wow.
yes, and I'm sure he would have, but I have a feeling that he would have been a guiding presence through his life. And he also says that, he started writing because Rabindranath wrote. And many of the other things he started doing, for example, his art, was so inspired by Ravi Thakur. Even the kind of themes that he chose. For example, the faces that we see in Rabindranath's art. And
Yeah.
curiously, Rabindranath started his art journey later in his life. He started as a doodler, and Shomitra Babu, actually, I think he did not shy away from emulating Rabindranath. It was a kind of tribute. So his art practice also started out with doodles. I happened to go through many of his journals. His daughter Polumi has been very kind and has given me access to a lot of very personal material. Amongst them were some of his journals, the Kheror Khata, which we can come to later, which was also very similar to his mentor Ray. So, uh, that is. I think it was inspiration and it was unabashed emulation. And I would say that Rabindranath had remained a kind of his North Star. somebody who he followed through his life. And he says much later in his life, when, the vagaries of life, the brutal realities around him were getting to him, he was also sort of immersed in grief because of various personal tragedies. He would always look towards Rabindranath and draw uh, some sort of consolation, some sort of healing power from him, because Rabindranath uh, did did go through a lot in his own life.
Absolutely. And so do I. Whenever moments of grief have just completely taken over, and, like you said, Dhruva Tara, right?
Yes,
In Bangla.
absolutely, absolutely,
So I think that it's
absolutely.
beautiful. It's beautiful,
So the
Sanghamitra.
line that "Tomarei koriyachi জীবনেরও ধ্রুবতারা" would have been absolutely true of Soumitra, much more than it was for Satyajit, I can say.
I get the goosebumps, my God, listening to you. Tomare koriyachi ami dhruvo tara. Oh my God, that's it. It transcends so many levels, let's talk about the chapters. A city divided and not a day without a line are rich with post-partition angst that so many of us are aware of, right? Political theatre and literary rebellion. So, do you feel Shoumitra's cultural activism is often under-acknowledged, in public memory?
Well, the chapters that you quote were from a time in his life when he was quite young. He had jumped into activism. He was an SFI worker, and those days, I think
So
most
was I.
right. So most sensitive uh, young people were left aligned. They leaned towards the left, and there was no dearth of inspiration, and there were no dearth of icons for him then. All the people who were street fighters, people, and particularly artists. From Shukanto to Subhash Mukhopadhyay, Manik Bandyopadhyay, they were all in that same sphere and mindset. So I don't suppose that it would have been possible for him to either contribute richly or to be remembered as a cultural icon at that stage in his life. He was simply someone who was seeping it all in, and I think his the artist of conscience and integrity, someone who was fearless and who spoke up against injustice and inequality. That was that he was being shaped. I think his education at home, and then the influence of Rabindranath and all the other greats, the Bandyopadhyayas of Bengali literature, Manik, Tarashankar, and who was the third? Vibhuti Bhushan. Uh,
Vibhuti
you
Bhushan
know,
Bandyopadhyay.
yes. So these people and the poetry, the protest poetry of the time, and
Yeah.
even the art, the powerful art that artists like Chitta Prasad were creating, the Bengal school artists, they were all very inspirational for him. Later, of course, all of this sort of shaped him into this person. And I have to say this, that I think he came from my parents' generation, and uh, that generation, and uh, a decade before and after, we have seen many protagonists uh, within Bengali literature and art and poetry in the cultural sphere, who were all more or less multi-directional, multifaceted, people who could inspire uh, the youth. And yes, and Shomitra Chattopadhyay had it in him to receive all of this and then create something out of that. But his contributions at a certain stage, when I think he was pretty much uh, left alone in a world when all the greats had passed, people who had inspired him. I think the only person who was around for a little bit afterwards was poet Shankar Ghosh. Otherwise, I think he was recognized as a major cultural icon in Bengal. So to that extent, I must say that it was not as though he didn't get his due. But of course, there's no end to how much, we can admire people like him. So I suppose, I mean, I will be happy if the book, uh, in even if it's in a very sort of insignificant way, in a minor way, it can sort of remind us about those times uh, in cinema, art, culture, and if we can acknowledge and remember him for his contributions.
Oh, of course, absolutely. I mean, for me, he's part of my entire subconscious, growing up years of learning the nuances of art, Bengali literature, and all of that. So, you also visit Shoumitra's early casting as Opu in Opu Shangshar. An exquisite detail. I'm losing words right now. So, do you think that moment haunted him creatively, like a role that he kept returning to internally?
That's an interesting question. Yes and no. So obviously, the first impression he made as an artist, he became, from being an aspiring artist from North Calcutta, he went into the pages of the New York Times. So that
Yeah.
is how it was just uh, sort of startling how
Yeah.
his first journey. And I think, growing up, even though I grew up in the 70s and 80s, I remember my parents and that generation. I think everyone kept coming back to Opu, even though he has his work went much beyond Opu Shangshar and Satyajit Ray. I think he was that first impression he made, and that cocoon of love and romance between him and Shormila. It was just unforgettable. I think it has remained like, there are certain lines from your favorite poetry or your favorite books, or there are certain imagery of art that will never be wiped away. I think Opu Shangshar has been that in the Bengali imagination. It's
Oh,
very, very difficult.
totally.
It is very difficult to,
Yes,
I
very
mean,
difficult.
it's hard to wipe that away. And Shomitra Chatterjee being a thinker and a highly, highly sort of critical thinker, I think he was not satisfied. He also, as an artist, he suffered from chronic artistic dissatisfaction, and that is what made his journey
That's what made him who he is.
absolutely. So since that was the case, he actually says in private as well as in some public forums that his work went much beyond Ray, and he said he would have liked to have been remembered as someone who had created his own path. So it was not as simple as that. It was a complex emotion for him. I'm sure he wouldn't wanted anything other than what he got from Oppo. But I think he wants his uh, admirers and fans and anyone who wants to examine his work and contributions to think of him as a more sort of multi-directional, multifaceted artist.
It's so interesting when you tell me about this, and I'm constantly traveling as I'm listening to you about he reading that letter, by the railway track and the letter that, he receives from Shomila Tagore. I mean, Opu Shangshar is embedded in my soul and in my heart. And you've just spoken so beautifully, Sanghamitra. So, Sanghamitra, the Children of Light section gives us Shaumitra's journey through Ray's golden age, right? So, did you find him evolving with Ray or growing apart from him? It's a very, it's a question that I think uh, comes into the mind of so many of us because we associate Soumitra Chatterjee with Satyajit Ray. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Right. It's somewhat similar to what I was saying. It's in continuation with your previous point. See, of course, his Manikda, I think three sections of my book is actually devoted to Satyajit Ray. And the reason I did that was that it is impossible to sort of capture the relationship of love, the bond, the you know the there are so many different things that sort of passed between them. I mean, at once he was like an elder brother, he was a mentor, he was someone from whom Shomitra Chatterjee had learnt. He said he learnt everything that he knew about cinema from Satyajit Ray in a single conversation they had uh, on a train journey, which I describe in the book. And uh, but we also see that it was not just cinema. Satyajit Ray came from a family that was almost sort of as uh, iconic as
Yeah,
the Tagore family, the Rays,
absolutely.
with Upendra Kishore and
Shukumar
Shukumar
Rai.
and everybody else in that family, Shukhalata
Yes,
Rao, Leela Mujumdar, uh, you know, and all the others. I mean, his uncles and cousins. This was a house that was just so rich with talent and multi-directional talent. So, uh, being able to sort of be in the same room as Satyajit Ray would have brought thrill to Soumitra Chatterjee, but the fact that he could sort of enjoy his indulgence and love and become a sort of lifelong student and protege was something that was beyond, his expectations in the beginning. But after that happened, I think it was impossible for, while Rabindranath and Shishir Bhaduri remained two other mentors in his life, Satyajit Ray must have been a constant. And
yeah.
I did notice that, after Ray's passing, we realize the vacuum in his life. He kind of lost direction for a while, and then he picked up his pieces and he moved ahead. He actually says that beyond his parents, Manikta was the most important person in his life. So the first would have been true, but within the sections in which I talk about his affinities with Ray, the various things that, in this case also, there were things that he kind of, to use a very sort of loose word, copied. He emulated, copied. He couldn't help it. There were many such things, from his reading to his Western music. His passion for Western classical music was something that Shaumitra's life was also sort of touched by. And Shaumitra's observation of Ray, the way his wisdom, his extremely sort of intelligent way of dealing with people and life, all of that he observes. And in a single chapter I talk about the affinities. However, I also talk about some of the differences. So Shomitra Chatterjee felt, I think very wisely, that he should just emulate and be inspired by some of the things that Satyajit Ray had brought into his life and things that were very rich and valuable. But there were a few things that by nature they were two different people. For example, Satyajit Ray was inherently shy. He was not someone who would speak a lot, or he did, but he was a bit choosy. Uh, but Shomitra Chatterjee was an extrovert by nature. He drew his energy from
From
his
people.
addas, his friends, his people, and he was the life of the party. He was That is one small example, but there are a few things that I talk about in the book, which I'm sure some of the people who are listening to our conversations would like to find out. So I'm not getting into them.
So you've written a very powerful statement. Only Manikda got me. So do you think that other directors outside of Ray's circle kind of did not really understand Shomitra?
So I think that he didn't mean it only in a professional sense. Although I have to say that he had a few directors other than Ray who meant a lot for him. For example, Tapun Sinha, who also taught him a lot at the beginning of his career. Uh, there was, of course, Mrinal Sen, there was Ajoy Kaur, uh, and I don't think he had any doubt in his mind that these were people with whom he had a great bond, and he was able to connect at an artistic level, and together they produced some excellent work. Uh, but this statement that he made about Manikda getting him was something that I think definitely it sort of veers into the personal sphere as well. That there was a stage in his life where he kind of felt misunderstood. He felt a bit isolated. So I think that is when he came to this.
So, let's just talk a little bit about his marriage with Deepa, in the section In a World Without Ray. Um, and also the friendship with Uttam Kumar, because I think all of Bengal is so divided between Uttam Kumar and Soumitra Chatterjee, and in my own home there is such a division. And it'll be wonderful to hear from you, Sanghamitra.
So the relationship with Deepa goes back to when they were teenagers. They fell in love when Deepa used to pick up Shoumitra's sister uh, in a school bus, and there used to be this gaunt, shy boy who used to lurk in the balcony. And then they started talking on the phone, and it's a lovely love story, So, uh, because they go back uh, to their adolescence, I think the bond had been very, very strong, and they kind of grew up with each other, uh, if you know what I mean. And they got married fairly early. And Deepa for him was always someone who was an ally, someone who he called a fellow traveler, because they were very, very sort of they had the same mindset, they had the same dreams and aspirations. And every time I've spoken to Shomitra Chatterjee's daughter, I have heard this time and again, that Shomitra wouldn't have become Shomitra if it wasn't for Deepa Chatterjee. Because she was the one who was also, she was a strong woman, a woman of principles, someone he could trust with all his, she was intellectually his equal, and someone who would also, for example, she was the one who sort of pushed him in the direction of starting Ikkon, the literary magazine. Uh, so, and she was a highly principled, as a person, and on top of everything else, she was also someone who was very good at whatever she did. So Shomitra was also, he was supportive, and after they got married, I think he sort of nudged her towards becoming a badminton player, and she started representing the state. Uh, so that was something that you didn't hear of these things
Yeah, you don't
in
know.
that decade.
Yeah,
So,
not at all. Even in today's decade, I think there.
yeah, many
Yeah.
of us are actually, we fall short. But I think this was a couple, and when I've spoken to people for the book, and otherwise too, when I grew up, a lot of people sort of looked up to this couple as aspirational, if you like. And, the word did not exist then, but they were the cool couple of that time. And they would walk side by side down College Street discussing books, cinema. They were part of the coffee house circuit. So, that is how they grew to be close and intimate. And I mean, you can see that Deepa was the love of his life. And this changed somewhat, which the book describes. It uh, it became there. See, the thing is that Shomitra Chatterjee was someone who was very desirable, and there was no dearth of female attention in his life. I think that started creating the trouble. There were problems. Deepa was found it difficult to put up with the attention that he got. And Shomitra Chatterjee, to be honest, I like talking to various people. It was hard for him to sort of keep himself back sometimes. So he did have his relationships outside of the marriage. So what happened was that I suppose they were both quite young, and uh, Deepa, I think, uh, turned a bit bitter about their lives together taking a turn of this kind. So it was not what it used to be, which is very much like, say, for example, I mean, I mentioned the film Shat Pake Badha that Soumitra Chatterjee had done with Suchitra Sen, where a wonderful romance goes sour, and because of external situations. And of course he was very fond of world cinema, and he had watched Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage. And uh, the coldness that had set into his own marriage would terrify him towards the end. So that is with Deepa, but Deepa actually sort of survived only for a few months after him. And I believe that Deepa never really sort of, you know, they didn't grow so apart that he left the house. He remained a family man. And he also says that he was probably a bit weak, that he couldn't do everything that a lot of other people would have done in his place. But Deepa she used to be bitter, but she continued to remain, a loving wife till the end.
Wow.
You also
Shobhit,
asked about Uttam Kumar, right?
I
So
asked about Uttam Kumar too. There was such like, I think entire Bengal is divided.
So, I have a theory in this. Amartya Sen wrote a book called The Argumentative Indian, but I think Bengalis, if you were
Are the
to
most
scoop
argumentative.
out a community within India, I think we Bengalis we thrive on arguments. And
Agreed.
we create binaries which help our addas thrive. So there's Mohan Bagan East Bengal, Suchitra Mitro, and Konika Bandyopadhyay.
Yes.
Uh, there's Ilish Mach and Chingri Mach, and of course,
Also, Ilish Mach from Podda and Ganga.
So there's no end to how
There is
much
no
we
end
can
to it.
slice up, our beliefs and lives, and then start our little jhagras about it.
Yes.
So I think Uttam and Shomitra I came out of that. Of course, even now, I mean, both of them are gone. But I think if you were to get a few Bengalis together and start an argument, I think we will see. And as you said, even in your family, there are there are people. So we've grown up
Yes.
with that. Having said that, I must say that this book talks about their friendship. I mean, while his their fans were squabbling and were getting at each other's throats and were almost like, how friendships and family
Yes,
relationships break down
absolutely.
over certain things like
Yeah.
this. They were actually, I mean, it was so endearing to learn about this, that uh, Uttam used to treat Shomitra, he called him Pulu, and treated him like a younger brother. And very often they used to sort of, while no one was looking, they had their favorite watering hole in uh, Great Eastern Hotel of those days. So they used to go and have a drink, and God knows what they discussed. Obviously, if someone could eavesdrop and write a book about it, it would have been fantastic. But they were actually very, very good friends.
Wonderful. So there's also, Shomila Tagore's foreword, right, in the book. So she writes, "We were in awe of Uttam Babu, but we loved Shomitra." So do you think that's the essence of his legacy, love over aura?
Suppose you could say that. I'm sure some people would agree with her, but in a general sense, being part of the audience, you do see that people who are Uttam fans have a certain passion, and he's called Guru. And he was also, in those days, he was actually literally mobbed wherever he went. But Shomitra was a different kind of an artist. He was much more sort of, he guarded his right to be the artist he wanted to be in public. So he was seen on Chorungi, College Street, Nondon. He went to pick up his daughter Paulomi at Modern High School, and I've heard such wonderful stories about not just students but teachers also sort of stepping out, because don't forget, Shomitra was an extremely good looking man.
He was absolutely drop dead gorgeous.
So his admirers, and I will count my mother and myself and some other women
Me
I
too.
know, uh, and I think Ray described it very aptly. He said the more intelligent section of the audience, especially the Presidency College girls, actually were Shomitra fans. So it was his way of saying that thinking women, more cerebral women, did this, whereas there were thinking and cerebral women who used to go to sleep with Uttam Kumar's photograph under their pillow. So I think it's very difficult to sort of create a binary here. Having said that, I think it was Shomitra Chatterjee was admired for many of the qualities, and you could see it in his manner, in his speaking, in some of the causes that he stood up for. I think we all admired the fact that when, say, for example, years ago, Khaddo Andolon, which is called the food movement, he walked. He supported the more progressive artists forum, Obinetri Shongho. He was part of that. He always spoke up during the emergency. He did not, I mean, there were artists who signed a document to say they supported Indira Gandhi during emergency, but he actually sort of um, uh, rebuked the people who came to his house to carry to get him to sign that. And then much later, so I would say, all the secular causes, all the causes where all the situations where freedom of expression was being compromised, where Dalits and Muslims were being uh, oppressed, and women were also sort of. So these are some of the things that he stood up for, and I think it's, you can say that it's aura, but I think aura is a very sort of surface sort of way of um, summing the admiration of for a person who was not just talented and uh, culturally iconic, but someone who also sort of was principled and stood up as a conscience, and you know was an exemplar of a kind.
Rapid fire now, Sanghamitra.
Yes, yes, yes.
So these are all one, you're going to have single answers for this and not a, really long one. So one Shomitra film that you think is underrated.
I think the film Benaroshi, it was made in the 60s by Arup Guha. Arup Guha used to be Ray's assistant, and it was made with, he was Ruma Guha husband. So he made this film. I feel that it's a film that very few people talk about, and I would urge you to watch the film.
A word that best describes his relationship with Satyajit Ray.
I suppose he was the protege, right? But as I said earlier in our discussion, I think it came up, it was much more than that. He was a family member.
Shomitra the poet or Shomitra the painter, which side surprised you more?
The painter. The painter.
A misconception about Shomitra you hope your book clears.
Well, firstly, the one about Uttam Kumar, most people didn't really know, although industry insiders knew that they were friends. The other thing was that we always thought that Shomitra must have been aware of his looks, aware of his effect on the audience and how good looking he was, but he suffered from a great deal of anxiety about his looks. He felt he was the ugly duckling of the family, and he had a great crisis confidence. There were other reasons why, I mean, which the book talks about, but he was not a very confident artist in a sense. Of course, he grew to be very confident. Yeah.
Your favorite authors?
Oh, it's very difficult to sort of see in Bangla from Rabindranath and Vibhuti Bhushan to Satyajit Ray, Shibram. Uh, and in English, I think, I mean, I will talk about, I mean, there are so many. I love Anne Patchett. I love Julian Barnes. I love Jhumpa Lahiri and Amitav Ghosh. Um, but amongst biographies, I have to say, I mean, since I've written a biography, I will say that, Satyajit Ray's biography by Andrew Robinson is something that I've really liked. And there's also a biography of Greta Garbo, written by a former editor of the New Yorker, Robert which Gottlieb, I think, uh, that that I would strongly recommend to people who like biographies.
Thank you, Sanghamitra, for being on today's episode. It's been an absolute honor to have you here with us. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.